Hey guys, we're in our final month of school and biology. So we're getting into our internal systems where we're going to talk about some macromolecules. We're going to talk about some human systems. Some of the stuff we already know from last year in grade 10, but we're going to get a little bit further than where we had last year. So pause the video. Look at the learning goals and success criteria before we move on. So in our bodies, there are three main compartments that stores fluid. We have the cytoplasm that's inside your cells. We learned that in grade 10, where we had your parts of your organelles and all that stuff that goes inside the cell. You learned that before. You have your fluid between cells. We call that interstitial fluid. And you also have fluid in your blood. And our bodies are made up of more than 60% of water stored in these compartments. Now, depending on the age and the size you are, that number can change, but we're talking about approximately 60% to 70% of water. Now, aside from water, these compartments contain many other kinds of molecules and ions. Those are inorganic matter. Inorganic matter helps with all the other functions. That is not the most essential functions of the body. Those functions are, they use things like organic molecules that contain carbon bonded to hydrogen and oxygen, sulfur, and nitrogen. Those are all your organic molecules that pretty much fuels the essential functions of your body. Now, these large complex molecules, we call that macromolecules or nutrients. Nutrients are the raw materials that our bodies need. They provide for us energy. They regulate cellular activities and build and repair tissues. All organisms need nutrients to perform their life functions. And for our human studies purposes, we're going to just focus on talking about human beings. And the four macromolecules that we will look at today are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Now, our energy and matter that's supplied by macromolecules, they maintain the body's metabolism. Now, we hear this word metabolism a lot, and basically it's talking about the chemical processes that carries out during when we have these things in our body, how it breaks down chemically. And sometimes you may hear, oh, like I have a fast metabolism or slow metabolism. That's just how quickly these chemical processes happen in these individuals. Now, all four groups of macromolecules together, we call them essential nutrients. So first we'll look at carbohydrates. They contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in that specific 1-to-1 ratio. They provide short-term or long-term energy storage, depend how quickly they're used. When they're used very quickly, they will not really provide long-term storage, but those that are left over can be stored for later use. There are two types of carbohydrates. We call them simple carbs or complex carbs. So here we have monosaccharides. These are simple sugars, simple carbs. Mono means one, saccharine is sugar. And these are carbs with 3 to 7 carbon atoms. These include things like glucose, that's in your blood, fructose, that's in your fruits. Disaccharides are double sugars. They're made up of 2 simple sugars. They're a little bit more complex, but not fully complex until we get to the next category. They include things like sucrose, table sugar, maltose, that's seen in grain, and lactose, which we see in dairy. And the most complex of them all are polysaccharides. They are linked with many simple sugars, and as you can see, poly means many, so things like starch, cellulose, and glycogen. Glycogen are carbs that are in the form of carbs that store energy in animals, while starch are complex carbs that are in the form of starch that stores energy in plants. Now, lipids are what we call fats. They are available in a large variety of foods, For example, the ones that we see in the picture in the middle of the page. Now, some characteristics is that it's insoluble in water, so it can't break down inside water. That's why there's a lot of times when you put fat and you mix it with water, it kind of separates. Now, the structure is a molecule of glycerol, which is a type of alcohol, with 3 carbon atoms attached to a fatty acid chain. That chain is an acid with a long tail of carbon and hydrogen atoms. Lipids generally store about 2.25 times more energy per gram than other molecules. Another form, phospholipids, they make up our cell membranes. And because that phospholipid is also insoluble in water, that's how they could control the amount of water that's leaving and going into the cell. So some examples of lipids are butter, lards, oils. We can see fish oil is one of them, avocados, nuts. They all have a lot of fats that are in that make up that specific food. Proteins. They are assembled from small subunits called amino acid. Most protein molecules are hundreds of amino acids joined together by peptide bonds that turn into chains. These chains are called polypeptides. So poly is many, and because they're linked by lots of peptides, so we call that polypeptides. Most enzymes are proteins, and antibodies that combat diseases are also proteins as well. Proteins help build and repair muscles and cell membranes. So as you can see in the image in the middle, protein shows up in a lot of meats, a lot of meat and alternatives, eggs. There are a lot of other foods that are not meat that have protein as well. Things like tofu have protein, and soy products. Some nuts also have proteins as well. Nucleic acids, they direct growth and development of all organisms using chemical codes. They turn into what we have is our RNA and our DNA. If you think back at our genetic unit, we know exactly how that is made with all these little subunits and nucleotides that make up our nucleic acid. Now, we've touched a little bit on enzymes before, but to go a little further, macromolecules need to be broken down into smaller ones to be absorbed by the cells in the small intestine. Now, hydrolysis is the process of that chemically breaking down of molecules. And what it needs is hydro, which is water, in order for it to break down lysis of your macromolecules. So on the chart to your right, you can see that there's the macromolecules, what their functions are, what their examples are. I'm going to see what it breaks down into and how it happens. Now, with hydrolysis, we know that we need a water molecule. So it's added to the macromolecule and it breaks down chemical bonds that hold the macromolecule together. This breakdown of chemical bonds involves a class of protein molecules called enzymes. They're secreted by the cells in the digestive tract, and they act as a catalyst, which increases the rate of chemical reaction without being used up in the reaction. So on your right, you can see that there is a list of carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, nucleic acid. All our macromolecules are here. You can see in all of them, they need to be combined with water for it to happen. And then with water, we also have the enzymes. So for carbohydrates, it's called carbohydrase. Lipids are called lipase. Protein enzymes are called protease, and nucleic acid enzymes are called nuclease. Note that all their endings end in ase. That is a good sign that we are looking at something that is an enzyme. A lot of different enzymes also end with ase in their ending, and the first part of their name is usually what they break down. So nucleic acid breaks down with enzymes called nuclease. Now, what they break down into for complex carbs, they'll break down into simple carbs to be absorbed. Lipids, they can break down into glycerol and fatty acids to be absorbed. Proteins get broken down into amino acids to be absorbed, and nucleic acid gets broken down into nucleotides to be used for RNA and DNA production. Here's a chart in the bottom. Take a look at it. There's a little bit more information on enzymes and how they work with macromolecules. Now, other substances that are vital to life in varying amounts are called vitamins and minerals. They're inorganic, and some of them can be organic, but they help our chemical reactions that help with our tissue development, growth, and immunity. They're all needed to keep the body functional and healthy. So take a look at the chart on to your right. You can pause the video. There is in the notes, there's a chart for you to fill in that relates or that correlates to this specific table. And last but not least, we got to talk about water. We mentioned it at the beginning, but this brings us back because the water is very important for our bodily functions to function properly. What it's needed is so that it helps us transport dissolved nutrients to cells that line the small intestine. It flushes toxins from our cells, lubricates tissues and joints, forming essential body fluids like blood and mucus, regulates our body temperature through sweating, and eliminating waste materials in our urine and sweat. Okay, so that is a nutshell of macromolecules and all these things that we need in our body. Here is a fun video for you to take a look at. If you can't click on the link inside the PDF, I'm going to also link that to the assignment or to the lesson today so you can watch that later. It's a short little video. It's kind of funny, but it's always good to know why you're avoiding or eating certain foods instead of just following blindly what people are saying. And your homework for today is here. I'm also going to post this on the lesson in Google Classroom as well. All right, so we'll pause here. And if you have any questions, make sure you let me know.